In this deeply moving true-to-life story, we follow Thandi Makona, a young South African woman whose world shatters after a life-changing accident, and whose fiancé walks out when she can no longer walk. But pain became her power, and silence became her voice. From hospital bed to national inspiration, this is a story of betrayal, healing, and breathtaking transformation. Stay with us as we unfold a journey that proves you don't have to walk to stand tall. Sometimes your strength begins when everything else falls apart. This is He Walked Out When I Couldn't Walk, Now I Teach Others to Run. Thandi Makona had always believed her life was just beginning. At 27, she was finally seeing her dreams take shape. She had completed her physiotherapy degree and landed a highly competitive internship at Chris Hani Baragwanath Hospital, the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. She loved helping people, and she had a gift for making patients feel seen, even when they were at their weakest. But her biggest joy, Saipho Dlamini. Saipho wasn't perfect, but he was charming, ambitious, and full of laughter. He worked in IT for a growing Johannesburg startup, and he had dreams of building a tech company of his own someday. Their love had bloomed slowly, like the jacaranda trees on the streets of Pretoria. Quietly, then all at once, they were engaged. Wedding plans were underway. Thandi's mother, a retired schoolteacher, had already started picking out fabrics for the traditional ceremony. Saipho's family had paid lobola 2 months ago. Everything felt aligned, her career, her love life, her future. Until one rainy evening changed everything. Thandi had volunteered to assist at a rural clinic outside of Johannesburg. The road back home was winding, muddy, and unlit. She boarded a minibus taxi, one of the old ones with shaky windows and a coughing engine. She didn't think much of it. It was late. She was tired. Then came the screeching tires. The driver lost control on a sharp curve. The taxi spun, flipped, and slammed into a concrete barrier. Screams echoed. Glass shattered. When Thandi opened her eyes, she couldn't feel her legs. She was rushed to the nearest hospital, barely conscious. When her mother and Saipho arrived, doctors gave them the grim diagnosis: spinal cord injury, partial paralysis from the waist down. Thandi tried to process it in silence, but all she could hear was her mother's stifled sobs. Saipho stood quietly in the corner, his face pale, his hands trembling. He didn't say much that night. Just held her hand, kissed her forehead and whispered, "We'll get through this." But Thandi knew something had changed. Days turned into weeks. She remained in the hospital, her legs unresponsive, her body bruised and broken. Every day was a new lesson in helplessness. Having to ask for assistance with everything, from bathing to sitting upright. The vibrant woman who once helped others stand was now fighting just to lift her own head. Saipho came less often. First he blamed work, then traffic, then his mother needing him. Eventually he stopped explaining. But Thandi still held on to hope. She remembered how he had once told her, "Even if you lost everything, I'd still choose you." So she waited for him to return fully, to show her that love didn't falter when life got hard. But the worst blow came not in words, but in a single message. One evening, after 2 missed visits, she received a text. "I'm sorry, Thandi. I can't do this anymore. You deserve someone stronger." Just like that, he was gone. Thandi stared at the message, numb. She didn't cry. Not immediately. Instead, she placed the phone on her chest and stared at the ceiling, as the fluorescent light buzzed above her like a mocking echo of all she'd lost. She wanted to scream. She wanted to fight. But all she could do was lie still, imprisoned in a body that no longer obeyed her, abandoned by the man who once promised her forever. What followed was silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Her mother tried to be strong, but even she couldn't hide the worry on her face. The doctors remained cautious with hope. And Thandi, she began to drift. She stopped eating, stopped asking questions, stopped caring if she ever left that hospital bed. But deep inside, in a part of her that still remembered who she used to be, something small began to stir. Not anger, not hope, just a whisper. Get up. Not today. But one day. Get up. The days after Saipho left were colder than winter in Johannesburg. Thandi sat by the window of her small hospital room, staring at the people passing outside. Nurses came in and out. Her mother fluffed her pillows, brought her porridge, and wiped away tears when she thought Thandi was asleep. But nothing could soften the ache of abandonment. The world outside moved on. Her friends posted birthday selfies, brunch photos, and work updates. But none came to visit. Not even Naledi, her closest friend since university. They all seemed afraid. Afraid of what to say, afraid of who Thandi had become. A girl in a wheelchair wasn't part of their picture-perfect feed. When her physical therapist tried to encourage her, Thandi offered polite smiles and no real effort. Why should she try? Saipho had left, her internship was gone, and her legs felt like lifeless weights. Then came the final blow. The hospital administrator informed her mother that Thandi's medical aid had stopped covering extended rehabilitation. They would need to transfer her to a public rehab center in Soweto, farther from specialists, understaffed and overworked. Her mother sighed but nodded. They wheeled Thandi out quietly the next morning. The center in Soweto was nothing like the hospital. Paint peeled off the walls, the food was bland, and the beds creaked with every shift. Still, it was full of survivors. Stroke victims, accident patients, war veterans. Most couldn't speak, walk, or even feed themselves. But what they lacked in strength, they made up for in spirit. And that was where Zanil found her. Zanil was 50-something, vibrant and unfiltered. A stroke survivor herself, she had been at the center for almost a year but moved with fierce independence. She noticed Thandi's silence during group therapy and rolled her wheelchair beside her. "You look like you're either going to cry or punch someone. Either way, I like you already," Zanil said, grinning. Thandi couldn't help but laugh, even if just a little. That was the beginning. Zanil became her anchor. She introduced Thandi to an online group for African women living with disability. Raw, honest, supportive. Thandi joined reluctantly, watching others post about their recoveries, their breakdowns, their victories. Some had lost spouses. Others had been abused. But all of them were still standing, even when their legs couldn't. Inspired, Thandi began to journal privately. She wrote about Saipho, about the screams in her head, about how it felt to be bathed by her mother, about the embarrassment of being wheeled into the shower by a nurse half her age. She wrote everything. Zanil read one of her entries one day and said, "You should share this. It'll help someone." "No one wants to hear a pity story," Thandi replied. "It's not pity if it's truth. And girl, your truth is power." That night, Thandi posted a short piece in the support group forum. "Today I cried while holding a spoon because my fingers shook too much to lift it. But I'm still here. And tomorrow I'll try again." Got 47 likes, 15 comments, and 3 private messages from women saying thank you. It was the first time in months that she felt seen. From then on, she posted weekly, sometimes joyful, sometimes broken. She didn't sugarcoat the reality. She talked about leaking adult diapers, about watching her body change in ways she didn't recognize, about Saipho's silence. People listened. One woman wrote, "I was about to give up, until I read your post." And for the first time since the accident, Thandi cried. Not out of sorrow, but from the realization that maybe, just maybe, her pain could be useful. Maybe there was life on the other side of heartbreak. Maybe being abandoned didn't mean she was unlovable. Maybe healing didn't mean walking again. Maybe it just meant choosing to live. That night, she looked at her legs, still motionless beneath the sheets, and whispered, "We'll try again tomorrow. Together." Thandi's mornings at the rehabilitation center began at 6 a.m. Not with hope, but with a dull ache in her lower back and the weight of limbs that refused to obey her. The nurses would come in, their voices already tired from the early shift, and begin the routine. Sponge bath, change of clothes, assisted toileting. Everything that used to take her 5 minutes now took 45 and left her exhausted. She hated needing help. She hated the way the staff looked at her like a fragile thing that might break further. But most of all, She hated the silence from Saipho that had now become permanent. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. It was as if she'd died in that crash and he had already mourned her, then moved on. Her body refused to cooperate. Her legs felt like dead wood, and her once strong arms were now weakened from inactivity. Each failed physiotherapy session chipped away at her pride until she began to wonder whether her life would ever resemble anything normal again. One Thursday afternoon, during a scheduled physiotherapy session, the therapist asked her to try standing with the help of parallel bars. Thandi tried. She pulled with everything she had. Her arms trembled. Her palms burned. Sweat beaded down her face. But her legs wouldn't lift. She collapsed back into the wheelchair. The therapist crouched beside her and gave a tight-lipped smile. "You're improving. It just takes time." But Thandi knew better. That day, something inside her cracked. Not a gentle crack like thin ice. No, this was a violent shatter. When she got back to her room, she screamed into her pillow so hard she thought her lungs might give out. Then she took her bedside glass and threw it against the wall, watching it burst into sharp, glittering shards. Her mother rushed in and tried to calm her, but Thandi shouted, "You think I'm okay? You think I'm strong? I'm nothing. I'm a burden." She sobbed until her throat ached and her chest felt hollow. And when it was over, there was silence again. Not peaceful silence, just the emptiness that follows after something sacred breaks. 2 days later, Thandi received a message on her phone. She hadn't touched it in a while. Most of her friends had gone quiet. But the message was from Naledi, her best friend. "I heard about Saipho. I'm sorry I didn't reach out. I didn't know what to say. I just didn't know how to be your friend in this." Thandi stared at the screen. She didn't know how to respond. Another message followed. "But I miss you. Love you. And if you'll let me, I want to be part of your healing, not your shame." Tears welled in Thandi's eyes. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel forgotten. That same night, she wrote a long journal entry titled, "My Breaking Point," and posted a section in the support group. "Today, I screamed at my mother. I shattered a glass. I called myself a burden. But tonight, someone reminded me that pain doesn't make me less worthy. Maybe healing isn't about progress. It's about being honest. Even if I never walk again, I still deserve love." The post exploded with comments. Something changed in Thandi after that breakdown. It wasn't sudden. She didn't wake up the next day motivated and singing. No. But she started trying again. During rehab, she didn't just go through the motions. She listened to her body. She asked questions. She learned how to slide from her bed to the chair more smoothly. She practiced turning herself over at night without a nurse. Every tiny victory, however small, was fuel. Zanil noticed. "You've got your spark back," she said one morning as they shared tea. "It's small, but girl, it's there." And Zanil was right. It was a flicker, not a flame. But flickers, Thandi remembered, are how fires begin. A week later, her therapist handed her a new challenge. Sit-to-stand exercises. Her first reaction was fear. The memory of her last failure still echoed. But this time she didn't panic. She took a deep breath, positioned herself between the bars, and gripped tightly. Her arms trembled. Her thighs screamed. Her spine felt like it was rebelling. But slowly, inch by inch, she rose to her feet, fully upright, for 3 seconds before collapsing back into the chair. The room burst into quiet applause. Her therapist smiled wide. "That's it. That's the beginning." And in that moment, Thandi didn't think about Saipho, or her old internship, or the wedding that would never happen. She just thought, "I stood today. That's enough." Thandi's mornings at the rehabilitation center began at 6 a.m., not with hope, but with a dull ache in her lower back and the weight of limbs that refused to obey her. The nurses would come in, their voices already tired from the early shift, and begin the routine. Sponge bath, change of clothes, assisted toileting. Everything that used to take her 5 minutes now took 45 and left her exhausted. She hated needing help. She hated the way the staff looked at her like a fragile thing that might break further. But most of all, she hated the silence from Saipho that had now become permanent. He hadn't called. He hadn't texted. It was as if she'd died in that crash and he had already mourned her, then moved on. Her body refused to cooperate. Her legs felt like dead wood, and her once strong arms were now weakened from inactivity. Each failed physiotherapy session chipped away at her pride until she began to wonder whether her life would ever resemble anything normal again. One Thursday afternoon, during a scheduled physiotherapy session, the therapist asked her to try standing with the help of parallel bars. Thandi tried. She pulled with everything she had. Her arms trembled. Her palms burned. Sweat beaded down her face. But her legs wouldn't lift. She collapsed back into the wheelchair. The therapist crouched beside her and gave a tight-lipped smile. "You're improving. It just takes time." But Thandi knew better. That day, something inside her cracked. Not a gentle crack like thin ice. No, this was a violent shatter. When she got back to her room, she screamed into her pillow so hard she thought her lungs might give out. Then she took her bedside glass and threw it against the wall, watching it burst into sharp, glittering shards. Her mother rushed in and tried to calm her, but Thandi shouted, "You think I'm okay? You think I'm strong? I'm nothing. I'm a burden." She sobbed until her throat ached and her chest felt hollow. And when it was over, there was silence again. Not peaceful silence. Just the emptiness that follows after something sacred breaks. 2 days later, Thandi received a message on her phone. She hadn't touched it in a while. Most of her friends had gone quiet. But the message was from Naledi, her best friend. "I heard about Saipho. I'm sorry I didn't reach out. I didn't know what to say. I just didn't know how to be your friend in this." Thandi stared at the screen. She didn't know how to respond. Another message followed. "But I miss you. Love you. And if you'll let me, I want to be part of your healing, not your shame." Tears welled in Thandi's eyes. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel forgotten. That same night, she wrote a long journal entry titled, "My Breaking Point," and posted a section in the support group. "Today, I screamed at my mother. I shattered a glass. I called myself a burden. But tonight, someone reminded me that pain doesn't make me less worthy. Maybe healing isn't about progress. It's about being honest. Even if I never walk again, I still deserve love." The post exploded with comments. Something changed in Thandi after that breakdown. It wasn't sudden. She didn't wake up the next day motivated and singing. But she started trying again. During rehab, she didn't just go through the motions. She listened to her body. She asked questions. She learned how to slide from her bed to the chair more smoothly. She practiced turning herself over at night without a nurse. Every tiny victory, however small, was fuel. Zanil noticed. "You've got your spark back," she said one morning as they shared tea. "It's small, but girl, it's there." And Zanil was right. It was a flicker, not a flame. But flickers, Thandi remembered, are how fires begin. A week later, her therapist handed her a new challenge. Sit-to-stand exercises. Her first reaction was fear. The memory of her last failure still echoed. But this time she didn't panic. She took a deep breath, positioned herself between the bars, and gripped tightly. Her arms trembled. Her thighs screamed. Her spine felt like it was rebelling. But slowly, inch by inch, she rose to her feet, fully upright, for 3 seconds before collapsing back into the chair. The room burst into quiet applause. Her therapist smiled wide. "That's it. That's the beginning." And in that moment, Thandi didn't think about Saipho, or her old internship, or the wedding that would never happen. She just thought, "I stood today. That's enough." 3 seconds. That's how long Thandi had stood the day before. But those 3 seconds felt like a lifetime of triumph. For the first time since the accident, she had seen herself upright, however briefly. Her arms had trembled, her knees had wobbled, but she had done it. Her mother had cried quietly in the hallway, and Zanil had clapped with the enthusiasm of a gospel choir. Thandi lay awake that night replaying it over and over in her mind. Not just the moment she stood, but the moment she believed she could. When she finally drifted off to sleep, it was the first time in months she didn't dream of the crash. Instead, she dreamed of running, barefoot, free and unafraid. The following week, her sessions grew more intense. Her therapist added balancing drills, short wheelchair sprints, and core building workouts. Thandi's hands developed calluses from the wheels. Her shoulders ached, her back muscles burned. But this pain was different. It was progress pain, not hopeless pain. Between therapy, she started helping other patients with their transfers or motivating them when they got discouraged. She shared her own breakdowns, the glass she shattered, the days she didn't want to live. One of the older women, Mama Lorato, gripped her hand one day and whispered, "When you talk, it feels like you speak for all of us." That stayed with her. She realized that her voice, broken but honest, had become something bigger than therapy. It was healing not only for her but for others too. When her movement returned enough to walk with the aid of crutches, Thandi sent out her CV. She had energy again. Oh, she still wanted to work in physiotherapy. After all, who better to help patients than someone who had been one? One private clinic responded positively and invited her for an in-person interview. Thandi dressed in her neatest outfit, her mother helping her button her blouse. She wore light makeup and tucked her crutches neatly beside her as she walked into the clinic. The panel smiled politely until they saw her walk. One woman raised an eyebrow. Another shifted uncomfortably. At the end of the interview, the lead HR officer said, "You're clearly passionate, Thandi. But given your circumstances, we worry the role may be physically demanding for you." Thandi nodded, thanked them, and left the room with her head high, but her heart sinking fast. She cried the whole taxi ride home. That night, she wrote a post. "Today I was told I'm too broken to help others heal. But I've learned more through this chair than any classroom ever taught me. If the door doesn't open, maybe I'm meant to build my own." The post went viral within the group, even outside it. 2 weeks later, Thandi launched her initiative, Rise With Me, a community-based program offering free movement therapy, mindset coaching, and emotional support for people recovering from physical trauma in underserved communities. It started small, just 6 people in a community hall in Soweto, an elderly stroke survivor, a teen boy recovering from a bike accident, a domestic worker with a healing fracture, and a few others. She brought mats, music, and most importantly, her story. "Welcome," she said. "I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to stand with you until you remember how to stand on your own." They cried. They laughed. They stretched. They healed. Word spread. The next month, the hall was packed. One afternoon after a workshop session, Thandi sat alone outside, drinking water and journaling. Car pulled up at the curb. She didn't think much of it, until she heard a voice that made her freeze. "Thandi!" He turned. It was Saifo. He looked different, thinner, older somehow. Guilt was etched into every line of his face. She stared at him, heart thudding. He took a few cautious steps closer. "I saw your post online. I didn't know you were doing all this." Thandi stood up slowly, her crutches by her side. Saifo looked at them, then at her. "I was wrong," he said quietly. "About everything." She didn't speak. Not yet. Because deep down, she knew he wasn't just here for closure. He was here for something else. Something he wasn't ready to say. The moment Saifo appeared, Thandi felt her chest tighten. The memories came rushing back like a tidal wave. His last text message, the silence, the empty bed, the tears she shed into her hospital pillow when he disappeared. Now here he was, standing before her in the same community hall where she had just spent hours lifting others with the very strength he once said she didn't have. "I heard about you through a friend. Saw your pictures online," he said, voice low, as if unsure of his place in the world now. "I just wanted to see you. See how you're doing." Thandi kept her voice calm. "I'm alive. And I'm standing." She wasn't angry. She was beyond that. What she felt now was something deeper, clarity. Saifo looked around at the banners, the mats, the people leaving with gratitude in their eyes. "You've really done something here," he said. "You look different." "I am," she replied. "I had to become someone new after you left the old me behind." They sat on a bench just outside the hall. Saipho hesitated, then finally said the words she didn't expect. "My girlfriend's sick, Thandi. Diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. It's a lot. I'm trying but—" He looked down ashamed. "She's pulling away. I don't know what to do." Thandi inhaled sharply. There was the real reason he came. Not for apologies. Not for closure. But because now he was living the pain he once ran from. Saipho looked at her, searching her eyes for help, for wisdom, for strength. The same strength he once said he didn't have. The strength he saw in her now. He whispered, "I don't know how you did it alone. I can't even manage it with support." She looked away. The street was quiet, save for distant sounds of children playing. Then she met his gaze and asked softly, "Do you know what it's like to sit in your own filth, too weak to lift your body, and the only person who used to wipe your tears leaves without a word?" He dropped his eyes. "I'm sorry, Thandi. I was a coward." Thandi sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. "You left because you couldn't bear to see me weak," she continued, her tone measured. "Now someone else is depending on you in their weakest moment. And you're scared." Saipho nodded. "I am. I was scared too. Every day. But fear didn't stop me from staying for myself. Fear didn't stop my mother from lifting me, or Zanil from wheeling me into therapy when I didn't want to go." She turned to him fully. "You don't need advice, Saipho. You need to grow the backbone you lacked when I needed you." He blinked, stunned by her calm sharpness. But he didn't argue. Because every word she said was true. After a long silence, Thandi stood up slowly. Saipho rose too, unsure if he should offer help or remain still. She looked him in the eye one last time. "I don't hate you. I've healed past that. But you taught me a valuable lesson." "What's that?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "That pain is better faced alone than endured with fake love." Saipho swallowed hard, eyes glistening. She stepped forward, not to hug him but to walk past him, on her own 2 feet, with her head held high and her spirit even higher. He turned to watch her walk away. And for the first time he truly saw the woman he lost. Not because of illness, but because she became stronger without him. Back at home, Thandi opened her journal. She hadn't written about Saipho in months, but tonight felt like a full stop to a chapter that once nearly killed her. She wrote, "Today, I spoke to the man who abandoned me when I couldn't walk. He came for help. I gave him honesty instead. Not out of spite but because I finally know my worth. I am not a victim of what he did. I am a survivor of what I rebuilt." She posted it online with a simple caption. "The light you ignite in yourself is the one no one can put out." The post was shared hundreds of times. Thandi sat back and smiled, not for the likes but for the peace. Because her story no longer belonged to Saipho. It belonged to every woman who's been left behind and chose to rise anyway. 2 weeks after her encounter with Saipho, Thandi received an email from a woman named Kelabogail Moketsi, a well-known producer at a national talk show called Ubuntu Morning Live. The subject line read, "Your story is changing lives. Can we feature you?" First, Thandi thought it was spam. But the signature and logo were legitimate. The message was short, heartfelt, and clear. "Your journey from injury to advocacy is moving thousands online. We'd love to invite you for a live interview to inspire more people, especially young women who are losing hope." Thandi's heart raced as she read it again. She had started Rise with me to bring light to others, not attention to herself. But this was different. This was a chance to speak not just to a room of patients, but to millions. She stared at the screen, unsure. Then she remembered the girl in the wheelchair from last week who had whispered, "You make me want to try again." That settled it. She replied, "Yes, I'd be honored." The morning of the interview arrived. Thandi stood in front of her mirror wearing a soft blue power suit, a gift from Naledi, who had since become her right hand at Rise with Me. Her natural hair was pulled into a soft crown bun, her crutches freshly polished, and a warm but steady smile on her face. Her mother was emotional. "You're going to change the world today, Nguana." Thandi chuckled. "One breath at a time." As the cameras rolled and the bright lights hit her face in the studio, she felt her heart pounding. But the moment the host, a gentle woman named Thembika, asked, "Thandi, what gave you the courage to fight back?" She exhaled and spoke from her soul. She spoke of the accident, the betrayal, the hopeless nights, the humiliating days, the love that left, and the fire that rose from its ashes. "I didn't fight because I was brave," she told the audience. "I fought because no one else was coming. And I wanted to choose life on my terms." After the interview aired, everything changed. The show's social media was flooded with comments. "She spoke what I've felt for years. I watched this with my daughter. She finally smiled again. This is the role model we've been waiting for. Thank you, Thandi. Thank you for being honest." Thandi's inbox exploded with messages. Women who had lost limbs, men who had survived strokes, young girls living with cerebral palsy, all writing to her as if she were an old friend. But one message stood out. "I haven't stood in 4 years. But I saw you do it. And now I believe maybe I can too." Thandi cried when she read it. Not out of sadness, but out of purpose. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a spark. With new attention came new opportunity. The Department of Health reached out to partner with Rise with Me, offering funding to expand to other townships. Schools asked her to come speak. Universities requested her as a guest lecturer in rehabilitation and resilience studies. She was no longer that girl in the chair. She was Thandi Makona, the woman who refused to stay down. Her mother could hardly keep up with the changes. "You're becoming a celebrity," she teased one evening. "I don't want to be a celebrity," Thandi replied. "I want to be a light. For people who've been sitting in the dark." And she was. Zanil called her one afternoon and said, "You've become everything Saifo said you couldn't be. And more." Thandi smiled. "And I'm just getting started." That night, Thandi sat at her desk and began writing. Not a post, not a reply, but a letter. "Dear girl who couldn't stand. I remember you. I remember the way you cried into the hospital pillow. The way you whispered, 'No one's coming.' I remember how heavy your legs felt. How broken your heart was. You didn't know then, but you were being remade. You weren't buried, you were planted. And look at you now. You walked again. Not because you had to, but because you decided you would. Love. The woman you became." Thandi folded the letter, placed it in her journal, and exhaled deeply. She wasn't healed. She was healing. And that was more than enough. One Saturday afternoon, while leading a session in Kailicha, Thandi noticed a young girl sitting quietly at the back of the room. No more than 10 years old, she wore oversized jeans and a too-big sweater. Her legs were thin, limp, and bound in braces. Her mother hovered nearby with a nervous smile. Thandi tried to draw the girl into the exercises. Simple arm lifts, toe-point stretches. But the child stared at the floor, unmoving, eyes blank. After the session, Thandi knelt beside her. "What's your name, beautiful?" No answer. Her mother leaned in, whispering, "Her name is Boapello. She hasn't spoken since the accident. It's been 8 months." Thandi nodded and looked Boapello in the eyes. "I was like you once," she said gently. "I thought silence would protect me. But it only trapped me." Boapello blinked but remained still. "I'm going to sit with you every week," Thandi promised. "You don't have to speak. Just let me be here." And she did. Week after week, side by side. No words, just presence. Boapello wasn't the only one. As Rise with Me grew, Thandi began seeing pieces of her old self in many of the people she met. A young mother with postpartum paralysis, a former dancer who lost a leg to diabetes, a boy whose stutter kept him from school. Each person came broken in a different way. But what Thandi offered wasn't just therapy. It was dignity. She taught people how to fall with grace, how to stand with patience, and how to find strength even when the body refused to cooperate. One afternoon, an elderly man who had suffered a stroke stood with his walker for the first time in 9 months. His daughter sobbed in the back of the room. Another time, a woman brought her husband to a session and whispered, "This is the first time I've seen him smile since the amputation." Thandi never saw herself as a miracle worker. She simply shared her pain and watched others breathe through their own. Few weeks later, Saifo reached out again. Not to ask for advice, but to say thank you. His girlfriend, Ayanda, was still struggling, but he was learning how to be present, even when it was uncomfortable. He said he now understood what it meant to love through pain, not around it. "I wanted to tell you that I didn't deserve your strength, Thandi," he said in a voice note. "But Ayanda does. And she's teaching me how to stay." Thandi listened in silence. When it ended, she didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some chapters close quietly. And that silence this time was a full stop, not a question mark. The breakthrough came on a cloudy afternoon. The usual session had just ended, and the room was clearing out. Thandi was folding mats when she felt a tiny tap on her shoulder. She turned. Boapello stood there, her braces clinking softly. Her eyes were wide but not scared. Then, in a barely audible whisper, she said, "Thandi." Thandi froze. Boapello's mother dropped the water bottle she was holding. Tears flooded Thandi's eyes as she knelt. "You said my name," she whispered. Boapello nodded, then reached out and hugged her tightly. That embrace was louder than any applause. It was the sound of a soul coming back to life. And in that moment, Thandi knew. All the pain had purpose. Months passed. Rise With Me expanded to 3 provinces. More volunteers joined. Naledi managed logistics. Zanil ran peer mentorship circles. Thandi split her time between field sessions, media engagements, and policy discussions. But her favorite moments were still the simplest ones. Sitting quietly beside someone like Boapello, breathing with them until they remembered they were still whole. One night, Thandi stood before a crowd at a national women's conference. The theme was, From Survivor to Seed Planter. She stood at the podium, looked at the hundreds of women watching, and said, "I didn't ask to become a seed. I was buried by pain, betrayal, and silence. But the soil taught me something the sunlight never could. That we grow not in spite of the darkness, but because of it." The hall erupted in applause. And for the first time, Thandi didn't cry. She just smiled. Because the seed had become a garden. And she was no longer waiting for someone to walk with her. She was leading others to run with her. 2 years after her accident, Thandi stood at the starting line of the Johannesburg Charity Adaptive Walkathon, a 5-kilometer event to raise awareness for spinal cord injury recovery. She wasn't alone. Around her were dozens of others in wheelchairs, on crutches with prosthetics, or guided by volunteers. Survivors. Warriors. Just like her. The MC called her name. Leading today's walk, a woman whose journey has inspired the nation. Thandi Makona. Thunderous applause followed. Cameras flashed. But Thandi wasn't thinking about any of that. She was thinking about the first time she tried to sit up in that old hospital bed. The weight of her useless legs. The text Saifo sent. The moment she decided not to die in silence. This was the real marathon, she thought. Not the race itself, but the miles she had already traveled from brokenness to boldness. Later that evening, after the event, Thandi returned home to find a handwritten envelope on her kitchen table. It was from her mother. Inside was a note. "Ngwana, I never told you this, but when you were in that hospital bed, I used to pray every day that God would give you your legs back. But what he gave you was even greater, wings." Thandi read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her mother had sacrificed everything, sleep, pride, finances, so that she could rebuild. She walked into her mother's room, hugged her tightly and whispered, "You gave me strength before I knew how to find it." Her mother smiled. "You gave it back to the world." Months passed, and Thandi's work continued to evolve. She launched the Healing with Thandi podcast, hosted a regional conference on trauma-informed rehabilitation, and began writing her first book, Still Standing: How I Learned to Rise Without Running. One episode of her podcast went viral, an interview with a burn survivor who said, "Thandi didn't just help me walk again. She helped me forgive myself for breaking." Her inbox filled with stories, some painful, some triumphant. People called her a hope engineer, a spirit architect, a fire starter. But Thandi always smiled and said, "I'm not here to plant flowers. I'm here to plant fires in people who thought their light had gone out." And that's exactly what she did. One Sunday afternoon, Thandi attended a small local school event. Boipelo, the once silent girl in braces, was now walking short distances unaided and speaking in full sentences. When she took the stage for her speech, her words made Thandi choke back tears. "Everyone told me I was broken. Then I met someone who told me broken people still shine. Her name is Thandi. She made me brave." The audience clapped wildly. Thandi sat still, hands over her heart, eyes wet, whispering, "You made yourself brave, Boipelo. I just held the light long enough for you to see." Thandi sat still, hands over her heart, eyes wet, whispering, "You made yourself brave, Boipelo. I just held the light long enough for you to see." One quiet evening, Thandi returned to the road near the curve where her accident had occurred. She stood at the edge, wind brushing against her face, the sun setting over the horizon. It wasn't about reliving the pain, but owning it. She took out a small stone, engraved with the words, "Still I rise." She placed it gently near the roadside, a silent monument to the woman who was broken here, but didn't stay broken. Then she stood tall, looked forward and whispered, "This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of the legacy." She turned and walked away, one sure step at a time. And this time she didn't need anyone to catch her. Because the girl who couldn't walk had become the woman who teaches the world to run with purpose.